Good evening, everybody, and welcome to PEP Talks. Some of you are still finding your seats. That's okay. I'll just do the little intro while you get settled. Tonight's topic is on parenting the teenage brain with Dr. Sheryl Feinstein. And I'm looking forward to this. I think we're all going to be engaged in a wonderful learning around the teenage brain. I'm Catherine Carroll, the Artistic and Executive Director of the Vancouver International Children's Festival. And if you are tweeting tonight, please use the hashtag PepTalksVan, V-A-N. Okay, so as many of you know, because you're here, PEP Talks is a new speaker series presented by the Vancouver International Children's Festival. We're bringing 4 compelling speakers to Vancouver over 4 consecutive months to delve into the challenging and sometimes messy world of parenting today's millennial child. So tonight is the 2nd event in the series, and net proceeds from this event go to the Children's Festival. Oh, excuse me. So just to let you know, we have 2 more speakers. They are on Wednesday, May 15th, Deborah McNamara, who will speak about the lost art of play. And our final speaker will be on Wednesday, June 12th, who is Lisa Bloom, and she will talk about raising smart kids in the new millennium. Before we move on, I'd just like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, whom without this event, this series would not have happened. So the City of Vancouver, the Georgia Strait, Cathay Pacific, and the Western Bayshore Vancouver. So if we could just give them a round of applause. Thank you. And now I'm going to introduce you to our speaker for this evening. Dr. Sheryl Feinstein is a professor and chair of the Education Department at Augustana College in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. She's written numerous books, including Secrets of the Teenage Brain and Parenting the Teenage Brain. She helped establish an alternative school for at-risk secondary students and speaks nationally and internationally on the topic of adolescence. However, she would proudly confirm that her greatest accomplishment is guiding her own 4 children through their teenage years. Please join me in a warm welcome to Dr. Sheryl Feinstein.
Good evening. I am so pleased to be here with you tonight and have this opportunity to share the evening discussing the teenage brain. A colleague of mine, Martin Brokenleg, once said to me that in order to really appreciate a presentation and understand where the presenter was coming from, you had to have an understanding of who that person was. And so in order to let you get to know me a little bit better, I thought I would introduce myself through a little bit of music. I'm going to play some music, and when we get about 2/3 of the way through, I'm going to point out to you, and if you know the song, I want you to sing along. This will be the only singing portion of the evening. If you are a quiet singer, that's absolutely fine, or maybe you're somebody that likes to be a little bit more robust, that's great too. So, memories? See, I already see somebody doing this around.
You got something for me, something you call love, but confess you've been a messin' where you shouldn't have been a messin', and now someone else is getting all your best.
Okay, let's sing, guys.
These boots are made for walking, and that's just what they'll do. One of these days, these boots are gonna walk all over you.
Great. Okay, good. Thank you. Good. Okay, now, so what does that have to do with me? Yeah, I'm sure you're worried. Wondering is, Nancy Sinatra and her song Boots was a very famous song, one that I had dear to my heart during my adolescence. I am not too proud to tell you that I owned go-go boots. Anybody else here? Okay, so my people are here. This is good. This is good. Feeling good. I remember at the time I wore my shorts much too short as did, or my dress is much too short, which most of the women did. In fact, there was even something known as hot pants that was kind of in fashion at the time. In 8th grade, I wore more makeup than I've worn in my entire life. And for some reason, I chose to top it off with some white glitter lipstick. Okay, so I was cool. I was looking good, yes. My favorite TV show was The Mod Squad. I don't know if anyone remembers that or not. Three young detectives. And of course, I wanted to be Peggy Lipton because Peggy Lipton had very, very long hair and she had a very dour look on her face, like important thoughts were going through her head. So I wore my hair really long and I had a really sour look on my face all the time. And I know that my teachers, my parents were looking at me and wondering what is going on in her head. Well, you know what? That's what we're here to find out tonight, is what is going on in the teenage brain, what is going on in their minds. And actually that song had two purposes, because one was to kind of introduce teenagers and what's going on in their heads. The second thing is, how many of you in this room were singing that song in the last 2 days? Nobody. Nobody. And yet when I asked you to retrieve it, your brains were able to do that. It was really, really quite miraculous. And so that's another thing, is how does the brain store information and retrieve it so easily? We're going to start with just a few brain basics, 2 questions, just to kind of give us an introduction to the brain, and then we're going to get specifically into the teenage brain. Now, how many of you have ever heard that the brain is your either left brain or your right brain? Quite a few of you. You know what? This is how we always used to look at the brain. The first inkling that we had that was too crude a way of looking at the brain was the man that kept having epileptic seizures. You know, and the doctors tried every kind of medication. They couldn't stop the seizures. They didn't know what to do. So finally, a surgeon came up with the idea of severing his corpus callosum. And the corpus callosum is the network of brain cells that connect the 2 hemispheres. Well, so they did the surgery, and sure enough, the epileptic seizures ceased, but the man was not able to do the simplest task. I want you to get an idea of what that feels like. A list of words right here, and I have a trusty pointer, and what I want is high tech. Yes, I always think there's something charming about going back to wood. Okay, yes. First, what I want us to do is just read the words, and I'm going to set the pace. So we're just going to, in chorus, read all the words. So starting at, I'm not quite tall enough to reach the top, but we've got it. So green, blue. Excellent, not a problem. Okay, now what I want us to do is the challenge. I want us to do that same thing, but this time I want you to read the colors. Once again, I'll pace it. So we're going to start with red. Okay, what happened? What happened? You know what, I was really asking your brain to multitask. It kind of says something, it probably has implications for when, text and drive. I mean, the brain is not good pulling information from 2 different sections. But from this and what happened to the man with the corpus callosum, we realized that the brain stores information, just not left side or right side. The 2 need to interconnect. We have modules that flow between the 2. And they really segregate, where we have one section that stores nouns, another for verbs, and the nouns even get more disaggregated into animals and tools. So it becomes much, much more complex, and there's much more communication between the 2 hemispheres than we first realized. Now we're going to go back to the second question. Oh, whoops. All right. The larger the brain, the smarter the person. Okay, I already got my handle on this crowd. I know what you're doing. Everybody's looking around the room. Who's got the biggest head? because that person should maybe be our leader. You know, is it him? Is it him? Okay, size does not make a difference. The human brain is about, if you put your hands together like this, that's about the size of your brain. And the size of the brain does not impact intelligence, although I'll tell you that there's a couple incidents when it does. Children with ADHD have about 4 to 5% smaller brains than their age mates. But the good news is that intelligence is not impacted at all. But the more severe the ADHD, the smaller the brain. And the other group that has a bit of a smaller brain are babies that have been really neglected. Canada was extremely generous, as the US was, in adopting a number of Romanian babies a couple decades ago. And because there were so many, it was hundreds of thousands came over to these two countries. And so there was enough to do a study, and they found that their brains were about a third smaller, and that there were certain areas with just no activity. And it came from the severe neglect. And by neglect, it was just that somebody wasn't feeding them when they were hungry. Somebody wasn't changing their diapers and cuddling them. Okay, so there's our start. Now, human brain is made up of two types of cells. We have neurons and glial. Neurons are only 10% of the brain, but it's the part that we're interested in because it's most closely linked to learning. Every single neuron has a cell body, and then emerging from it is a dendrite. A dendrite grows, it's like a little hair inside your brain. It grows every time you have a new experience or learn something new. So like a couple years ago, I learned how to text. When I learned how to text, dendrites grew in my brain. When I learned how I've been working a little bit on trying to do a little crocheting, dendrites grew in my brain. I want you to think right now, in the last 6 months, what's something that grew a dendrite in your brain, and I want you to share it with the person right next to you. So take 2 seconds. What grew a dendrite in your brain? Okay, because of time, I'm going to have to bring it back. But can 2 people share? What's something that grew a dendrite in their brain? Oh, wow. Excellent, excellent. That probably grew a lot of dendrites. Somebody else? Oh, very fun, very fun. Did you hear what she said? Learning folk dancing. Yes, okay, so these grow dendrites. We're wanting to grow a forest of dendrites. They've done research where they take students that have dropped out of high school and compare them to students that graduate high school. There are significantly more dendrites in those that complete high school, and or in college, and you can imagine why. If you drop out of high school, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times learning stops. You're not having the interesting conversations. You're not reading the books. You're not challenging your mind, where the person that goes on to college is challenged almost every single day. So we want this forest of dendrites. There can be 10,000 coming out of one cell body. And then we have one axon that comes out of each neuron. When a dendrite from a neuron connects with another dendrite, that's when we have communication. And I make it sound like it's really happening slowly, but actually in our brain, the communication is happening at incredible rates. It's combusting, generating, bubbling with thoughts. When the two meet, we end up with a synaptic connection where learning actually occurs. Okay, here, this is a picture, an actual scan of synaptic connections. This is of a 10-year-old. We used to only think that the time of formative growth was the preschool years, that's when kids had this incredible ability to learn. So we've invested huge amounts of money in that. You know, when it comes to Head Start programs, when it comes to making sure that they get into daycares and preschools where they're going to learn information. It wasn't until really a few years ago that a neuroscientist named Jay Geed took 4 to 21-year-olds, and every 2 years he scanned their brains. He kept doing it to the same kids, and he found out that same overproduction of dendrites and synaptic connections happened in the adolescent years. So this means the adolescent has an incredible opportunity to sculpt the brain they will take into adulthood. So they are learning information more quickly, more efficiently than adults will, much more so than children. So there is a huge potential, but it matters where they're spending their time. If they're spending their time reading literature, math, doing science, that's where they're growing the dendrites, because that's how we get the dendrites, right? It has to be through experience. If, on the other hand, they're playing video games, watching TV, okay, they're getting really good at that. And they're growing all kinds of dendrites there. Well, the drama doesn't start. I mean, this is like a huge potential that they actually have in their brains. The next thing that happens is pruning. And pruning works on the use it or lose it theory. Because the brain is all scheduled for survival. So if you're using information, the brain says, yes, we need this information. This is important to our survival. But if, on the other hand, the information isn't used, you're probably going to forget it. For instance, if I say to you, what's 3 plus 4? Yeah, I bet we can do. I'll give you another one, guys. Okay, what's 2 plus 6? Sure. Did you even was anybody counting on their fingers going, man, this is challenging. I didn't know we were going to have math. No, I mean, it came, you had it to a degree of automaticity because it's something that you had used over and over again. But I'm thinking, if you think back to middle school, high school, some information that you learned then that you just cannot recall at all anymore, maybe it's a math algorithm, is 10 to 1. What's happened is that you didn't use it, so you lost it. It actually withered and died. It's no longer there and available. Okay, as adults, which most people in this room are adults, we have about 1 to 3% of our synaptic connections pruned. That means they wither and die every year. And it's kind of a good thing because it helps. We don't need to remember everything. We don't need to remember the person that we just meet by chance. We don't maybe need to remember a process at work that we're only going to use one time and we can let it go. For the adolescent, the pruning is massive. They lose about 15%. So this 15% is egalitarian. It goes from every area. So let's say that you learned a whole lot of math because you just couldn't get enough. You hardly learned any math. What were you doing with your time? Then your brain prunes. You know what? You're both going to lose about 15% of that math knowledge. You're going to be fine because yours probably was some things you didn't need to know, and you'll still be able to be a very good mathematician. You didn't have much to begin with. Now, let's hope you've got a strong self-ego as I'm saying this. And there she is, and there it's going to be. So this is, for students, this is an absolutely unique opportunity to build a better brain. The brain they're going to take forward into adulthood. And as you can see, short-term memory increases by 30%. Certain things in the brain actually increase by 100%. The adolescent brain is active in every way to a higher degree than the adult brain. Okay. There. I love this saying, neurons that fire together wire together. Okay, we just said that about, where they spend their time makes a difference. When I asked you guys your math facts, nobody had problems with that. You got it right away. If you use neurons, if kids practice things over and over again, if they're a musician and they practice their scales over and over again, if they're a reader and they read a lot practicing, if they're an athlete and they're out there and they're shooting that free throw over and over again, it comes to automaticity. I'll give you an example. When I was 16, I was learning how to drive. And I took it very seriously. I really wanted to learn how to drive. And I had a driver's ed teacher. So I followed everything he said perfectly. He would say, okay, buckle your seatbelt, adjust your seat. So I'd do all that. Put your hands in the 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock positions. So I did. And then he'd say, okay, now adjust the mirror. And I'd adjust my mirrors. And then he'd say, okay, now every 10 seconds, check that back mirror. So I would be going 1, 2, 3. I mean, I was serious. Okay. Now, we scroll forward numerous years, and I get in the car, and I've got maybe my coffee beside me, the radio's on, maybe I'm singing along, I've got a friend in the car, we're chit-chatting, and I'm still a pretty safe driver. What happened? I drove so many times that many of the skills that came along with it became automatized. They came to a level of mastery, and we want that with some things. Question to you, have any of you ever done the same drive, like maybe it's to work, maybe it's to your parents' home, to a good friend's house, and when you get there, you can't even remember the drive? Okay, that's what we call scary. We're not exactly aiming for that one. Okay. And so what we want to figure out is what kind of things do we want? We don't want everything to automaticity, but there is something to be said. The more time your kids spend in certain activities, the stronger their brains are going to get in those areas. Okay, one more thing about the brain before we go into another one. The brain loves patterns. It is constantly seeking patterns. It's a pattern-seeking device. Give you guys an example. I have 10 questions here, and I am going to read them off like this. Just bam, bam, bam. What I want you to do is I want you as quickly as possible, just shoot back the answer. Okay, don't listen to your neighbor. Just tell me what you think. Okay, are we ready? And you have to look at this paper. Oh, we've got the directions. Good. Okay, what color is this paper? What do cows drink? Okay. No. Oh. Okay, no, they do not. But what did your brains do? Almost to a person, what did your brains do? You did just what they should do. They made a pattern. The brain is constantly seeking patterns. It's constantly trying to find out. And we have patterns in language. There's a way we put language together. Math, there are patterns for how we put, and once you grasp what the pattern is in math, it's like an aha moment. When it comes to sports or music, I mean, the scales in music, when it comes to playing a sport, there's patterns. And it's when the kids understand the patterns, that's when they can really go into full motion. Up until then, a lot of times you'll see some frustration. So anything we can do to help them understand the patterns helps. All right. Now, and this actually shows the difference between the structure of an impoverished neuron and an enriched neuron. Do we have any teachers in here? as it happens in the okay, really quite a few. They did some fascinating research, and it was not with teachers, it was with rats, just to clarify. And what they did was they had a group of rats that had rat toys and rat friends. And then they compared it to a group of rats that had no rat friends and no rat toys. And it's kind of, it only gets sadder. Okay. Is they let them play like this for a couple months, and because then they did autopsies, which I think obviously, yeah, on the rats. And what they found out was there were significantly more dendrites and synaptic connections in the rats that had friends and had toys. And I think there's strong implications for schools. If the teacher's the one that's getting to do all the toys, if the teacher's the one that's getting to do all the talking, getting to do all the demonstrating, they're getting brighter by the minute. You know, but that's not our objective. And so we have to make sure that we get our kids also talking, participating actively, and I know that that's in education because I'm an educationist too. That is one of our high priorities. We want to get them actively involved because that's what's going to grow the dendrites in their brains. Now, here's a picture of the human brain. I want to focus on two parts. One is the frontal lobes, and the frontal lobes are a part of the brain that is in charge of all good things. It's logical thinking, rational thinking, good decision making, abstract thought. You know, symbolism. They know that if there's a poem about love and it talks about planting a seed and watching the beautiful garden grow, and then after a while, winter comes and the garden begins to die. The one that understands abstract thought will know this is a love story that started and then then the people went their separate ways. Before abstract thought, the kids will tell you, no, this is about somebody planting a garden. All this happens up in the frontal lobes. It is logic, reason, good decision making. Okay, then we have the amygdala. The amygdala is the emotional part of our brain. So we just need to differentiate between these two parts of the brain. Okay, this lovely woman became really quite instrumental in studies and gave us some important insights. Is this picture, just like it is, was shown to a number of adults and a number of adolescents. Every single adult in the study, you can just like in your mind decide which emotion you think it is, don't share. In this study, every adult thought it was fear. 50% of the adolescents thought it was fear, and then the other 50% thought it was surprise and shock. Well, this really intrigued Deborah Yergelin-Todd, and she thought, you know, I want to find more about this. And so what she did was, she showed them the picture, but then she did an MRI scan while they were watching it. All the adults were using their frontal lobes. They were making logical decisions. They were thinking about it, they saw the emotion, then they thought about it. It was fear. When it came to the adolescents, even if they got the answer right, they were relying on their amygdala. And this is what one of the biggest challenges for parents are, and it's why we're going to get into what happens because of this. Adolescents are relying on a different part of their brain. They are relying on the very emotional part of the brain, while the adults, because our brains have had a chance to develop, are relying on the frontal lobes. From this research, we also learned that body language and facial expressions are learned. We always think that people just know those things, and actually they don't. And during adolescence is when we learn these things. So what do we see because of this? Because of this fight between the amygdala and the frontal lobes. You see misunderstandings. And I have a hard time believing that you are not going to be able to relate to this, that you will be able to relate to this. There are multiple misunderstandings between the adolescent and the adult. The mother will say something simple like, you know, your hair's in your eyes. And the daughter will go, you hate my hair, you know, and run off to her room. As a teacher, the teacher will go up kindly and say, so are you about done with that work? And the teenager interprets it as, she thinks I'm stupid. She doesn't think I can get it. And they do it with their friends too. You'll see them in the lunchroom, and they'll be in the lunchroom and they'll look over at a table, and maybe somebody will just slightly turn their body and they'll think, they don't want me to sit at their table. A lot of these things they misinterpret what we say, they misinterpret our body language, which makes for a lot of disagreements. It makes for a lot of unhappiness between the adolescent and the adults in their lives. And it even goes further, is with my own youngest son, James. He was sitting there in front of the TV and watching a show, that's fine. And I went by and I said, James, the lawn really needs to get mowed. And he said, yeah, it does. And you know where it's going. Okay, so I go about my work, you know, and I'm messing around the house for 30 or 40 minutes, and I'm pretty sure that lawnmower is surely going. And I come back, and James is still in front of the TV. And I'm like, James, you know, what's the deal? And it was not without a bit of attitude before he did go out, but the neuroscientists would say that James actually misunderstood me, which was hard for me to accept. But they would say, you need to be very, very specific. If I would have said, this needs to be done, you know, right now, James and I would have been on the same page. Instead, he was simply agreeing with me, yes, Mom, it does need to be done. So it was not helpful. So the more specific you can be, if you tell them to clean their room, you're probably what they're going to do and what you were hoping for are quite different. You know, you better say, I want all the laundry off the floor. If there's a piece of pizza in there, I want it in the garbage. The more specific you get, the more you're going to communicate. There is more emotional language, because remember, it's going through the amygdala. This emotional thing, so everything is really charged. You will, I am betting, have a teenager, maybe not always, but once in a while, and this also goes for the youth workers in the room, have a teenager that will speak to you in a way that no friend has ever spoken to you, that you can hardly believe that someone is speaking to you, and luckily you love them, you know, as adults, if you have a problem, let's take the teacher example. If you have a problem with your boss, you know, you go up to your boss and usually first you cool down, if you're smart. You don't send off that steamy email, you know, send, you know, or you don't march in the office. A lot of times you even take a day to think about it. You know, what should I do? You know, and then you go in and you're very respectful. You put maybe forth your thoughts, but you keep the respect there. I'm betting, especially, let's take the middle school, high school teachers, whether it happened to you or not, and for you when you were in middle school or high school, I bet all of you saw an incident where, especially a high school boy perhaps talked to a teacher in a really inappropriate way, or perhaps they've talked to you in an inappropriate way. The emotions come out first. So until that transition happens, and it will happen. The 14-year-old brain is much, much more immature than the 18-year-old brain. We can expect more from that 18-year-old. Okay, another attribute we see is bad decision-making. Is because of all the changes, and it's a combination here. There's so many changes going on in their brain, and then this reliance on the amygdala, they make bad decisions. I'll share a couple. I remember it being in middle school, and we loved sleepovers. Anybody here remember love and sleepovers? sleeping over with your buddies, your girlfriends. Some of the guys would sleep over with their boyfriend, guys. Okay, and I remember for some reason we would wait until the first person fell asleep, and then we would freeze their underwear. Okay, this was not a good decision, and it's something I no longer do. I mean, trust me, if I'm invited to your house, I will not freeze your underpants if you go to bed before me. Another example is I was at a high school recently, and I was there for a sporting event, and all of a sudden I heard a car just squeal out of the parking lot. Not for 1 second did I think it was the principal. I thought, no, this is a 16, 17, or 18-year-old kid heading on out. What I want you to do now is I want you to think of a decision you made in middle school or high school that you would not make today, and I want you to share it with either 2 or 3 people around you. And if somebody is kind of by themselves and they want to scooch over, please welcome them. But think of something and share it with your friends. Just take a minute or 2. Okay, just because I feel like I wasn't invited to the party, can we have 1 or 2 people that can maybe project, just share, because I would love to hear.
I wouldn't wear so much makeup in grade 8.
You wore way too much makeup?
I wouldn't wear so much makeup in grade 8.
Okay, in grade 8, lots of makeup. She wore lots of makeup in grade 8. Were you looking good? Do you have pictures? Okay, good. Somebody else. Yes.
My girlfriend and I camped out in her backyard on a night when we knew it would rain because John Denver sang, "I've seen a lot of sunshine and slept out in the rain."
Oh, well, that makes total sense. That makes total sense. Should we have one more? Because these are funny, cracking me up. Okay.
So we used to ride our bikes out of a side street as fast as we could, blind across a big thoroughfare of cars, for reasons that I can't even quite remember.
No, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. Risk-taking, it's a problem with teenagers, and especially teenage boys. We'll maybe touch on that later. Good example. Okay, pardon? Okay, does somebody else have another one? Yes, please. I think you're the only one here that ever did. I'm going to have to write your mother. We'll talk after. No, isn't it the experimenting? Some of these things, and you think, what was I thinking? You know what? I'm so glad that sometimes you don't have to pay for every bad decision you made. They will make bad decisions. There's just no two ways about it. You guys remember, and it gets better. The older they are, the frontal lobes are pretty well developed by 18, but actually they need to be about 24 years old before they're fully developed. And so then that's why you can probably, some of you even sit there and think, I wasn't doing that great with my decisions at 19 and 20 either. You know, I mean, it really takes a little bit longer to get that down. Okay, so what are some other things that happen? Oh, I'm pushing the wrong button, sorry. All right. Okay, we continue with this balance between the amygdala and the frontal lobes. This top one is for people that have middle school children. Who has middle school children? Quite a few people. Okay, and let me tell you, I have no silver bullet for this, which is too bad, is because there are so many things going on in their brain, especially with the overproduction of the dendrites and synaptic connections, they have a really hard time getting organized. They forget a lot. And the middle school teachers here will tell you they forget their books, their pencils. I've had kids forget their shoes. You know, it's like, how can you forget your shoes? You want to teach them responsibility, but they are going to have some safety net help at times, because they are, what our expectation is, their brain is really not hardwired for it yet. And so you're going to see them forgetting homework. They'll leave their band music at school. When the concert's coming up, they'll leave their tennis shoes when they need them for a track meet. It's a really challenging and kind of a frustrating time, because as parents we're starting to expect more, but this isn't a time where they really have a difficult time putting it together. We can use things like planners and checklists and reminders because we want them to become self-efficient, but we also need to be a bit tolerant because it gets better. It really does in this avenue.